off with harbour porpoises themselves. They're small dolphin-like animals. They're just less than 2 metres long. They live all around our coastline in the UK, and they're actually our most numerous cetacean, or whale and dolphin. But actually, we don't know a lot about them. They occur in the Thames, we know, because of public sightings over the last 10 years. But we don't know if when they're seen just once, or if there's many of them, if they are random visitors to the area, or actually if the Thames is an incredibly important habitat. And that needs to be known so that we can protect them and conserve them in the future.
We study a whole range of species from the very smallest to the very largest, and as you can imagine, these types of animals produce different types of sounds. An interesting analogy on land is that the larger an animal is, generally the lower frequency or the lower pitch the vocalizations are. So if you think of an elephant, it produces very low frequency rumbling sounds. If you think of a small mouse, for example, it will produce high pitched squeaking sounds. It's very much the same with the whales and dolphins.
Harbour porpoises are very small. They don't really surface a lot, not like dolphins. They don't make lots of splashing. And so unless it's absolutely glassy calm sea state, it's really hard to see them. So we have to use a different technique to study harbour porpoises. So for that, the perfect survey tool is acoustics. We use the techniques of acoustic survey so that we are passively listening to the animals rather than actively putting out sound to find the animals. This way we think it doesn't really impact their behaviour, and we can really understand what's happening in that natural environment without having to affect them at all. An acoustic survey works by using hydrophones, which are underwater microphones, and we use them to detect or hear animal sounds.
And the hydrophones are very important because they cover a whole range of frequencies. We're actually looking at a 10-metre long oil-filled tube that we typically tow behind the vessel, up to 400 metres behind us when we're surveying at sea. For the purposes of the Thames survey, we only had 100 metres of cable in the water. This just ensured that the tail end didn't drag through the mud. The cetaceans, the whales and dolphins, produce a whole range of sounds, from the infrasonic, the very low frequencies, up to the ultrasonic, the very high frequencies. Neither of these types of sound we can hear with the human ear. So we're completely reliant on our underwater microphones, our hydrophones, and our computer system for detecting some of these very peculiar, hard to distinguish sounds.
So harbour porpoises, dolphins or whales make sounds underwater, and their sound waves are picked up by the hydrophones. The hydrophones then transmit these onto our boat into computers, which allow us to see the sound using programs which create spectrograms, spectrograms being a sort of visual representation of the sound. Harbour porpoises make these clicks to locate their food, to locate each other, and as well to communicate with each other. And because they make these clicks almost continuously, we can use the sound of these clicks to actually survey for where they are, how many there are, and what kind of activity they're up to, if they're feeding or just communicating.
When we're planning an acoustic survey, we need to use our knowledge of how sound travels underwater. What we have to do is look at the distance that we're likely to detect the particular species of interest from the vessel and from the hydrophones, and look at how far apart we have to place the transect lines, how that might impact the area we're working in.
As we learnt earlier, harbour porpoises make a very high frequency or high pitched sound. The higher the pitch of the sound, the shorter the distance it travels. So it means in an area that we're surveying for harbour porpoises, we actually need to survey more of the area than we would with, say, a blue whale, where we could have less transect lines in an area to understand how many blue whales there are. When we're doing a survey for abundance and distribution, so the numbers and where they are, we don't want to bias that by taking any consideration of where they might be grouping because of feeding activity or nursing activity. So what we do is we design survey lines that cover the whole area, that cover all different habitats within that area, but also cover it in an equal fashion, so that we can come back a couple of years later and the results that we get can be comparable.
So once Anna has designed her optimum survey box, we then need to zoom in on that track and see what obstructions there might be there. So here in the North Sea, we know that that area has got a lot of oil production platforms in it, for example, and then we would build in deviations so the data collected during that bit of the track wouldn't be counted. And for example, in the Thames estuary, where we're going to be confined to some fairly narrow channels, we're going to have to look at how many times we're going to have to travel each of those channels to get a fair representation of the area of interest.
When a whale or a dolphin is out looking for a fish to eat, it typically uses a sonar system, which is a form of echolocation. So the porpoise, when it produces these clicks, is producing a click, it transmits into the water column, hits a fish, bounces back, and the porpoise is actually listening out for that echo. And when it hears the echo, it can calculate in its brain, essentially, it's like a supercomputer, an auditory supercomputer. The porpoise can calculate the distance to that fish. And as it produces more and more clicks, it can hone in on that fish, and it can distinguish exactly where it is in the water column. So their sonar system is a bit like an ultrasound scanner. You can get a very clear picture on a monitor of a baby in the womb, for example. And that's essentially how a porpoise is seeing the world. It's not seeing the world with its eyes, with its visual sense. It's seeing the world or sensing the world through its acoustic sense. So here we can listen in on the echolocation clicks of a harbour porpoise, or the sonar clicks that are produced by a harbour porpoise. So this first train of clicks, this first sequence, is a single harbour porpoise, and it's passed from in front of the vessel to behind the vessel as we overtook it. This means we can count porpoises as we pass them by. So we have one porpoise, two porpoises, three porpoises, and a fourth train just starting at the end of that 1 minute window. Life at sea can be very challenging. It's also immensely rewarding. So we may spend weeks, even months at sea, and in many ways that's an amazing, tranquil lifestyle to lead, surrounded by nature's bounty, the whales and dolphins we're so passionate about. Other times there can be storms and squalls and almost hurricane force winds, so sometimes we have to batten down the hatches and sit out some fairly nasty weather. But of course all storms pass, and inevitably there'll be a wonderful sunrise the following morning, and we can carry on business as usual.
When we're out at sea, our small boat, which is only about 21 metres, has about 10 to 12 personnel on board. Everyone on the boat does everything, so which makes us a little bit unique from other research vessels. We have a number of scientists, a number of interns or volunteers that we train up to be scientists and train up in our scientific techniques. And then we have a number of crew who are driving the vessel and doing the navigation, etc. And we're all living in very close proximity. We share cabins. No one has their own private cabin, not even the captain. We are always on a watch schedule or a rota, so everyone is doing a bit of everything. Everyone cooks, takes turns cleaning, including the captain, and we also take turns observing for animals. So even though we're doing an acoustic survey, we also do some visual work, as well as listening to the hydrophone, and resting, of course. You have to have a little bit of resting in there as well.
We all gather for the central evening meal. That's our main focal point of the day, when we can talk about the progress of the survey and what people's thoughts and reflections are of the survey work so far. We've just completed the first ever survey for harbour porpoise in the tidal Thames, which is our late winter, early spring survey. We're hoping to do another survey in about 6 months' time, so that'll give us some seasonal information. We're very pleased to announce we did indeed discover porpoises throughout their range in the Thames estuary, as we were hoping. We saw 17 animals from the deck of the boat, which may not sound a great deal, but on top of that we had over 100 acoustic detections. So we know there's at least 100 animals using the Thames estuary as a prime habitat. And we're not just counting the number of porpoises and looking at their distribution, we're also interested in the possible threats that may be affecting them. So for example, we know that marine debris or or litter in the water column can seriously affect marine organisms such as harbour porpoises. And we also know increasingly that noise is becoming problematic. Our waterways are full of noise from shipping and from construction activities, so we're hopefully going to get a handle on exactly how noisy the Thames estuary is. And looking forward, we'll be coming up with potential mitigation strategies or ideas we can use to reduce those pressures on the natural stocks of harbour porpoises using the River Thames.